Hi, everybody. This is Matthew Poes of Poes Acoustics. And in this episode, I've got special guest Lon Neumann. Lon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Happy to be here.
So, Lon, I want you to kind of describe what you do. I met you through the CDRP committees and have found you to be an invaluable source of knowledge and experience in this industry. You have a very close relationship with a lot of the people that I think were critical to the development of the standards we work off of today in surround sound, basically. And I actually didn't know who you were when I first got started, but had to, I kind of looked you up to find out the things you've done and was very impressed with your tenure in this industry and your experiences. You're one of those people that I think is a little bit of an unsung hero in the background. Like you're not a household name necessarily, but you actually have been a part of some critical things that have taken place to allow these standards to exist the way they do. And I think probably others do know who you were. I'm only starting to learn some of these folks. I knew people like Floyd Toole because he wrote a book and basically became well known for that. Probably wouldn't have known him outside of that. There's people like Tom Holman, for instance, who you know well. Like I know who he is because of THX, but beyond that, actually didn't know all of his contributions to the industry. So thanks for coming on. Why don't you do a little bit of a introduction for yourself and what you do and your background, and we'll kind of go from there.
Okay, I'm not very good at this, but let me let me see what I can throw together here. Well, it's been a good career for me. It continues to be. My my entire career has been here in Hollywood, in the Hollywood entertainment of different forms. In my earliest years, it was uh, performance engineering stuff, live sound, and also which later segued into recording. And it's an there came an inflection point where it made a big transition into the technical side of audio technology, and it's been that way now on the technical side for a long time. And so in I'll just spoiler alert. I worked for Stevie Wonder for quite a while as an audio engineer, and that opened lots of doors for me. Notably with Sony, uh, especially Sony, I guess, but others as well. And so I shortly made a transition to uh, working with Sony as a field engineer in the early days of PCM, and let's see, I'm getting a little bit astray here, but I forget exactly where I was going with that, but it's nevertheless it went on from there, and there was the earlier period with Sony, and that came to a conclusion and moved on. And years later, I was hired back to Sony for my second tour with Sony for the SACD project, which maybe not everybody is familiar with at this point. In my humble opinion, it's to this day, it's still the best quality release format for sound altogether, especially music. It's but anyway, so I was the Western operations manager for the SACD project, and that opened doors for me into the world of spatial audio. At the time, it was 5.1. By the way, my pal Tomlinson Holman makes a big point of it's not 5.1, it's 5.1. And he coined the phrase, so I guess he rightfully, he claims, since I'm sorry, I'm fumbling here, but he rightfully claims to be able to say that it is 5.1 rather than 5. Anyway, so but that's space. So that's
He
surround
corrected
sound.
me on our call.
Oh, okay. So he makes a point of that. So so that opened mind, my world, my perception to the world of spatial audio. But in a sense, we had it before because stereo is actually a form of spatial audio in as much as it creates a phantom image between the speakers. And that's just one dimensional. People say, well, it's not 3D, must be 2D. Well, it's not 2D, it's 1D because it's just width. There's no height, there's no
Yep.
depth, but it's some sort of spatial. But mostly when we talk about spatial, it's from 5.1 and on from there. So I got to cut my teeth on surround sound with the SACD project, and it was my part of my responsibility was setting up and configuring and calibrating surround sound systems for people. At that point, nobody knew what was needed, so everything was educational, explaining, and some of the precepts that exist still today originated there. Things like level matching and timbre matching and phase matching and angularity. Uh, was that all existed with 5.1, and it persists today, and it's even more important today. But anyway, I got to spend years doing that and going around to mastering labs and pressing plants with QC rooms and recording studios and artists and A&R departments at record companies and on and on. And but so anyway, there was that was where I really got into spatial audio, and it's just from there. It's in recent times it's morphed into what we now call immersive audio, which is fully 3D, uh, and typically with home systems, I guess we should say point 7, point 1, point 4, and beyond. So there's a lot of 9.1, point 6 that exists, but then there's
And more.
and more. But then there's cinema. So there's actually two forms of the format that we mostly work in is Atmos immersive audio. So there's cinema Atmos and there's home theater Atmos, and they're different. They even use different technology, different physical systems. The renderers are different, and the, so one is allocentric is the term. The other is egocentric. Home theaters are egocentric. Cinema is allocentric. In home theaters, stop me if I'm digressing too far, but it's in
It's
home
a good
theaters,
conversation.
we the virtual. I have to remind people sometimes that the virtual model that we're attempting to create is a hemisphere, and some people don't quite get that. They think of it as a horizontal slice and an upper slice, but that's not the right way to think about it, because what we're really trying to virtualize is a full hemisphere, and including sounds that or- seem to originate we perceive them as originating between the speakers, so but what we're really trying to do is to create a virtual hemisphere of sound. We can come back to that, but cinema on the other hand can't do that, because part of what makes the home theater work is there is a place where all of these things work well, that we can call it the sweet spot or the sweet zone. And so you can do things like having uh, precise timing with each speaker to have phase coherence to allow those phantom images to, but you can't do that in a cinema, because you have an audience that's seated all over an auditorium from left to right and front to back, and all of them have a right to expect a good program. And so home theaters, the technical term is egocentric because it's based on a self in a place. I think I just lost picture here, but I guess we're back. Um,
Yeah, we're seeing you. Okay. So
But
this just to kind of make sure the audience understands where you're going with this. Egocentric means this hemisphere around an individual. Speaker
yes,
placement is optimized to one individual
right.
rather than to a large seating area.
Yes, but
And the allocentric approach that's used in commercial cinema, that is an approach that's built around a large set of seats. It's more rectangular, like shoebox shaped, and is trying to optimize for a large. That's what you're saying, correct?
yes. So they can't use the techniques that we use in home theaters to create the immersive image. So the way that's addressed in cinema is that there's just speakers everywhere. There's just it can be as many as 64 speakers in a cinema Atmos installation. That's at the top end. That's the limit. But so the idea is that there's so many speakers spaced so closely together that there's likely to be a speaker that's close to where you want that image to occur, and so that's where the renderer sends that sound, but it does it without, not by virtue of phase coherence, because that can't exist. You still need timbre matching throughout, and levels need to be set, and angles need to set, and basic placement all needs to be set. But so that, anyway, there's the two different forms of Atmos that exist: cinema and home theater, and then there's a lot of other details that are at work there. But so in recent times, I've spent a lot of time in immersive at this point, and but in more recent times, just lately, I've gotten fascinated by a new form of immersive audio that uh, Sony didn't invent it, but they are popularizing it for sure, and promoting it and advancing it. It's immersive audio in headphones, and that's seems anathema to a lot of people who are familiar with headphones. But it's a technology that's known as binaural,
Mhm.
and but you know, if you stop and think about it, we as just normal organic humans always are able to hear a sense of space with just two ears.
Yep.
So it shouldn't be too surprising that we can do it, but we have never been able to, we've never had that in headphones. Maybe in a laboratory somewhere, but not in popular circulation. But so Sony has developed this system of binaural audio that's known as the 360 VME, which stands for the virtual mixing environment. It's a professional system. It's for professionals to use in professional spaces. But binaural audio is interesting because it it factors in what we call the HRTF, the head related transfer function, which is the technology that we use all the time for perception of space. But so some of the basics of that is when you have a sound that originates over here somewhere, it goes directly to this ear, but it also goes to this ear after it wraps around your head. And so that's what we try to, that's the head related transfer function, the how the head itself influences our perception of the sound. So it factors in things like the size of the head, the shape of the head, the shape of, you know, the nose, how prominent the nose is as sounds go
Yeah.
wrap around, but also
Even your
the
Pina.
the ears themselves, the pinny in the ears, and also you know, the shape of the ears and the angle of the ears. Do they stick out? Are they flat back? Are they little? And what the details of the pinny, but also the ear canal itself is part of it. So the way they do it, the way they capture and utilize the HRTF is they put tiny little measurement microphones right inside the ear canal of the listeners. They have a clever apparatus that keeps it centered in the ear canal. And it's the tiniest little microphone that you can manage. It's about the size of, well, I don't know, maybe a grain of rice, and that's not quite the right shape, but it's really super tiny, so to get inside the ear canal and right up next to the eardrum, so that it then just naturally captures all of the HRTF effects, because it all happens organically by when we hear. It's all of those things are all combined, and they all have their influence by the time they get through the ear canal to the eardrum. So if we're able to put that measurement microphone right up by the eardrum, we can capture the all of the effects that just happen organically. So when you use this system, they sit you down in your workspace or in their lab or whatever, and they put these little measurement microphones in your ears very delicately. They have a little apparatus that does that, and then they ping each of the speakers of the immersive system, say 7.1.4. So that's so that's basically 11 speakers, and but it could be different. But that's typical, and then they capture the your HRTF response to each of the speakers. So a speaker over here is going to be have a different effect between this here and first of all, there's a timing difference because this one gets here first, and then there's a slight delay. But all of those effects are captured, and then they create a profile. They call it personalization. Every listener is personalized for that given space, and then it is processed by their software, and a profile is created, and it's applied to a renderer for play out, and then you can in the phones you will have the experience of actually sitting in that immersive space. And to demonstrate it, when they're setting it up, they have the listeners take the phones off and put them back on and do repeated comparisons to the way it sounds in the headphones versus the way it sounds in the immersive speakers. And when it's done right, it matches. It sounds identical. You have the experience in the headphones of actually sitting in that space. And then you can go away somewhere to a different location, and with just a set of headphones and a laptop that has a renderer in it, but with just phones and a laptop, you can have the full experience of sitting in that space. And this Sony used this during the lockdown of the pandemic to continue working on feature films when their people couldn't get into the workspaces, to the mix space, to the dubbing stage, and they were able to continue working through the pandemic, creating immersive cinema with this technology, and needless to say, they would always ultimately check it again in the actual immersive studio space to make sure everything. But I don't know, maybe there was some touch up here and there with things they should, but it was effectively it was the way to work with immersive audio in headphones. And so now people are using it in other creative ways. They have teams of people that uh, maybe scattered around in different places. You could be on a vacation or something, or just in different, who knows. And uh, anyway, it's kind of I find it to be a fascinating thing that it works.
Yeah. I, it's a technology actually that I had gotten pretty into a couple years back and was amazed to find how old. I mean, really, the essence of the technology is it's new modern technology is allowing us to do things they couldn't do when they first started to play with this. But yeah, binaural goes back quite a long time. So I had a guest, you might know him, Dr. Edgar Chouiri on, and he developed a piece of software that he uses to create crosstalk cancellation. and allows you to do binaural listening with speakers. That was the original intent of that technology, but built into it, because of the research that went into doing that, the software allows you to do everything you're describing that Sony did. And anybody can buy this software if they want to from him. And then for the HRTF, what he does, which I know Floyd doesn't like this, but I'll just say, having experienced both, it's a lot better than he gives it credit for. He uses the blocked metis method, which is where the microphones go into the ear canal and then just sit. They basically block the ear canal, and then you can measure the HRTF from that, and it creates a model with an assumption of what the ear canal contribution is instead of actually measuring directly what it is. And Edgar's view is that that's a lot easier to do. Like, he can basically ship this system off to anybody, and it's easy to set up, and that the loss, if you will, of not getting the ear canal is relatively minor given the modeling they do. But I did that, and I did exactly what you said. So I went into my room, and we took measurements of the room using the blocked metis method, characterized my ear canal. I think the part of it that they also have, you didn't mention, but I'm sure Sony has this too, is head tracking, because that actually is a pretty critical part of perception, is having the system recognize your head movement, since those kind of happen. So his uses a webcam, maps your face, and then as you move around, it's able to do accurate head tracking. And you could do the same thing you're just describing. You could put headphones on and listen to a full 3D recording of something, take the headphones off and switch over to the speakers, and it was like hearing the exact same thing. There was a very, very tiny difference between the two. In fact, most of the difference came from the physical, the visceral stuff that's kind of missing with headphones. So the impact of the bass, for instance, was lost a little.
The
Other
stuff that
than
you
that,
the stuff you feel in your chest.
yeah, exactly. That, like the concussive effects and
Yeah.
vibrations and everything, that was lost with the headphone. But like the spatial effects, and the neat thing about all this that I found, I kind of went down a rabbit hole with it, but then kind of realized that we're stuck with what we have. I Edgar refers to this term as proximity, and I'm going to go with that term. But proximity, he describes as the ability to recreate the perception that somebody's whispering in your ear. So it's not just sound all around you, but actually the ability to have sounds move towards you and back very accurately. And binaural can do that very well. There's other 3D sound field systems that can do that well. I have never found Dolby Atmos or its predecessors or alternatives like RO3D or DTS to do proximity well. It can do everything else, but the way I perceive it is it's like all the objects are kind of stuck to a sphere around you, and they can move overhead, they can move around you, but they can't really move towards you and back all that believably. A little bit. But with binaural, you can totally do that. Like, I actually was showing Gene De La Sala back when I did the interview with him over on Gene's channel. I set up a system so that he could put headphones on, and I could recreate the effect of me walking towards him and back from behind him. And I did that while we were on a live stream, and he freaked out and threw the headphones off. And because it was like so real. He
Yeah.
honestly thought that I had come up right behind him and done that. But with a surround system, I've never found, even like horror movies that try to play with that effect, that they quite do it as believably as that. So it kind of makes me wonder if, as technology progresses, as much as I would hate to see our precious surround systems go away with big
Hmm.
speakers and all that, I could see a situation where we get to a point where people are getting that experience, but they're doing so maybe through like AR VR headphones and AR VR goggles. I mean, with headphones in it, and it's giving you actually an even better, more realistic surround experience than is currently possible with speaker-based systems.
Well, I don't want to lose my speakers.
I don't either, but I could see that happening.
So, to me, one of the thrilling things about it is some of the simple stuff, which is, for example, center. Because, first of all, fr- from my point of view, one of the most powerful things about surround sound is the center channel. I mean, we've always had a phantom center, but it's a little bit of a compromise because f- for one thing, you have to be sitting right on the center line to perceive it coming from the
Mhm.
center. If you move this far, you're not going to hear it in the center anymore. It's coming over from over here. And so likewise for anybody who's sitting next to you, they're not going to be having the experience of the center channel. But it's even more than that. There's a paper I've got that studied the fact that even when you're right on the center line, there is a comb filter that is applied. So it in my book, one of the most powerful things about surround sound is the center channel. So that exists in all the other immersive format. There's still a center channel, and it's just the best place, the best way to handle center imaging is with a real center channel. But then also left and right in conventional phones, left is all left, as if it was coming from 90 degrees this way, and likewise on the right. But that's not the way it was mixed. Left and right are up front with a subtended angle of 60 degrees across the front. So you get that with a good binaural rig like the Sony 360 VME. The center is not just on the center line, but it's out in front of you. It's not in your head. It's out in front, and left and right are perceived at the correct angles, not just straight and left. So that's maybe that doesn't get as much recognition as it ought to, but to me, it's because it's kind of one of the simple things. It's just left and right and center, But and people focus on everything else, but some of the main benefits are just right up front with the left and the right and the center.
Sure. Well, we have forward evolved hearing, and we tend to perceive, you would know more about this than me, but I think when they're producing content for movies and definitely for music, a lot of the focus is on what's on the screen, so that's in front of you. And so I would imagine that the majority of the action, if you will, and from a sound standpoint, are objects moving around you in front. There is stuff moving everywhere, but a lot of the heavy lifting happens in those front three channels. So having a headphone system that can recreate that accurately is important because, like you said, the typical experience people get is not that. It's sort of more like in your head and doesn't really sound real. I think one reason why it's not getting the attention it deserves is that the public experience isn't very good yet. So you've got things like Apple's approach and Sony, I think, with the Sony 360 reality system, where they're not using actual measurements of your HRTF. They're using models. And it appears like both of them have a thing where you take a picture of your ear and then they probably put together a database. And so they're using like averages where people with an ear like that, it's roughly probably this, which is pretty good, but not perfect. And then you've got, the head tracking. And so they're using little, measurement systems in the headphones that allow it to figure out your head movements. But we also hear with our eyes quite a bit. So if you're used to seeing even speakers in front of you, like if you're sitting down, it kind of anchors you to a certain position. But if you've got like a phone in your pocket and there's music playing through it and you're walking around, you actually don't have that visual point. So I feel like what people are getting right now is very watered down compared to what's happening in the labs. And as a result, the experience is kind of mixed. Some find it good, some find it bad. I think the other thing, I was kind of hoping you could touch on this a little bit. So I have my own opinions. They're probably wrong, but I'll share them anyway on the mixing of surround sound. So going back to the conversations I had with Edgar, he and I think, are kind of like-minded on this. And that in my mind, there's two uses for multi-channel audio in music. We'll just kind of stick with that for now. And one of them I like a lot more than the other. So the one that I like is where the surround system is being used to transport you to a musical event that you're not really at. So when they take and they mix the music, it isn't some sort of fake artificial thing. It's actually a space, like a jazz quartet that's playing in a club. They're transporting you to the club as if you're not in the band, because I don't really want to feel like I'm in the band. I want to feel like I'm in the audience watching the band, maybe front row, something like that. So I think that when they do recordings of large orchestras or jazz quartets, that's not an unheard of thing to try to use it to spatially recreate the environment. But the majority of recordings are multi-track studio recordings. There is no live event. There never was, other than what they did in there. It's all contrived, basically. And so what they're doing instead, I see it as like an artist palette. We've just offered them a wider palette than they used to have. And so they're using it more in a creative sense of like, I can place the drummer over your head. And so what you're seeing is a lot of weird stuff like that. Like there's some Beatles albums that were remixed recently where I noticed they had taken the Beatles and like moved them all around you. and you've got like the drums behind you, and the guitar is kind of overhead on the left side, and the voices are all around. And I listen to that and I think, I don't know what this is supposed to be, but this isn't, it's not what I'm looking for. And I think that there's another kind of public revulsion to this, in that I think that the industry is still trying to figure out how to use multi-channel audio in the mix. They're still playing around with it, and right now it's more of a creative tool that's maybe being a bit misused, rather than something that's contributing to a different, more realistic experience. I'm
Indeed.
curious your thought.
Well, I have similar thoughts, but it comes down to creative choices and good taste, good musical taste. One of my pet peeves on the basic, when it really is a live performance in a space. Uh, One of my favorite examples is Jeff Beck live at Ronnie Scott's in London. It has a good surround mix, and they have. I don't know the people that worked on that project, but whoever it was had the good sense to realize that when you mix the audience sound, it, you it should be what you it should be what you would think you would hear from what the camera is presenting. So,
Hmm.
and that is not that the audience is out in front of you. The audience is behind you and all around you. And
Yeah.
I have friends who should remain nameless who, to this day, when they're mixing shows, the the audience sound is up front when it doesn't need to be, and it doesn't make it doesn't make sense to me. So I think it should be mixed the way the camera presents it, so that the audience is around you and behind you. So the other thing
Yeah.
is another is a different a different take. It's not the realistic thing, but just creative. Um, Greg Penny remixed some Elton John stuff so creatively. Uh, Rocket Man in Atmos is just stunning, and it's there's things that do zoom around from different directions that didn't exist in the original, but it's just done so well. It's musical, it's creative, and it really it makes sense. It makes good sense, and also in it wasn't immersive. It was he may have redone it, but surround "Candle in the Wind," his tribute
Mhm.
to Lady Di in in surround. But he did the special surround mix that was an acoustic version with acoustic guitars, and I think it was strictly acoustic. I don't think it was. I may be wrong, but there again, the guitars are in weird places. They're behind you and to the side of you, but that's not realistic. But it was tasteful. It was creative. It was musical, and it really
Sure.
made sense in that context. And it's just it's a beautiful experience. It's not pretending to be reality, but still it's very pleasant and musical.
Sure. And that makes sense. And I should be clear, I'm not against that at all, but I think it's what you said. It's got to be tasteful. It has to be. It's like, I think to look at things that have been done, to go back to the Beatles example I was using, Love, I think was well done. I actually think that was a neat use of surround. It was an early immersive sound format. There's nothing realistic about it. It wasn't intended to transport you to a live Beatles concert. But it was designed to transport you to some sort of an event, and the movement and placement of the instruments and voices was designed to um, add to the, I think, that what they're trying to transport you to. That was, I think, pretty well done. But this recent stuff, I don't think was. I was kind of disappointed in it. The one you're talking about, I don't know that I've listened to that. I think I maybe need to go check that out. But I have heard certainly some other recordings where I think that they've done a good job. The one that one of our common acquaintances, and I consider him a friend as well, Peter Aylett, he and I was ashamed to admit that I like to use it for test material because it's not a particularly good song. But there's this song Boom that is a reggaeton type, but it's done in Atmos. Why I like it is that they have voices and instruments that are actually spun around the room. So they're not just moved around, but they're actually completely spun around. So one of the things you talked about earlier that I think is critical and often is wrong is the timbre between speakers. And what can happen is that as the object moves around, it should actually change in timbre. That's your HRT-off, but your brain compensates for that actually so that you perceive it as sounding the same as it moves around within reason. Some of the change in sound is on purpose because it's what gives you the perception that it's behind you or overhead. But sometimes the speakers are causing such a significant shift in timbre that it actually sounds very unrealistic. And even the levels sound off, even if they technically measure correct and things like that. So um, I like to use that as a test to make sure that the timbre between the channels is good. But it's this song that's like, there's nothing realistic about it. They're just playing around with it. But it's one of those songs where like, I don't know what a real live event of that would have been in the first place. It's a completely electronic song. You know, there's no real instruments there in the first place. So not only was it done on a computer, multi-track in the first place, but also like even if they played it live, I mean, it would have been big PA speakers in front of you on a stage. So I think in this case, it makes more sense to use it the way they did. And I think with a lot of the older stuff, I think the challenge is that we hold it so dear. Like you mentioned that it started with Stevie Wonder. I'm a huge Stevie Wonder fan. I love his music. I probably, and I'm sure other people, especially older people who grew up with Stevie Wonder. I mean, I got into it because of my dad and he introduced me to it, but I obviously didn't know Stevie Wonder in his prime. I knew Stevie Wonder as a aging singer who was an icon already. My dad, you know, and I think yourself as well, knew him as somebody who was up and coming to become an icon that he is today. So like you guys heard his music in a certain way. When somebody goes back and mixes it in surround, they're changing it. And in some ways we might feel like they're ruining that whatever we hold in our head is the right way it's supposed to be. So it's like whoever does that has to do a really good, tasteful job in redoing that in surround sound so we don't feel like that song we love that was recorded in a particular way has been lost and ruined. Some of the artists I've heard when this does get done, they say, well, actually, we had an idea in our head of what we wanted, but technology didn't allow it. So this is giving us an opportunity to remix it the way we imagined all along. And that's tough because, again, we grew up hearing it a certain way, but it wasn't recorded the way it's been redone. But actually, the artists who are still alive are going back in and saying, well, this is what I wanted all along. So now
Yeah.
you're hearing it the way I had in my head.
Well, remember back in the day, this was decades ago, in live performance, The Who did quadrophenia in
Right? Yeah.
quad in live performance. So,
Yeah.
and I've just been running into this this week actually. Yesterday, in fact, somebody's approached me about the feasibility of using an immersive installation, creating an immersive installation for a live play, like a Broadway play. And
Yeah.
was, it kind of surprised me. I wasn't expecting that. But then, you know, in Las Vegas, they currently have the Sphere, which is a big attraction in Las Vegas now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real sphere. It's a physical sphere. It's totally spherical, and there's a powerful immersive system inside. And they use it for live performance, and it has an interesting aspect to it. First of all, that in itself is pretty interesting because the live mix would be, you know, you'd be mixing immersively for the performance, which is a new element for performance. But they also have balconies in the sphere that have quite a thrust out into the auditorium, and that puts the audience underneath in a shadow, a sonic shadow. So
Mm-hmm.
they have separate immersive zones under the balconies to accommodate the audience, and that's kind of an interesting thought, and also, but uh, I
I
forget
mean,
what triggered
control
this, but
channels, I think. Well, you were saying somebody wanted to do it for like a Broadway play to do like an
yeah.
immersive audio.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that I'm not sure that it'll actually come to pass, but they're considering it. But you know, it's also true that it's pretty expensive. I mean, there's a lot more speakers that have to be purchased in the first place, and the amplifiers and the cabling and the mounting
Yep.
and you know, rendering it to it, the system that feeds it and everything. So
Yeah.
we'll see if
Well,
it
and there, I
actually.
know that. Sure. There's a number of companies like Acoustics that have developed immersive audio technology for live events like that are good. But I think one challenge you would have is I would assume a lot of sound engineers that would specialize and have a lot of experience in that industry would not have a lot of experience with immersive sound. So then the challenge becomes
No.
making sure you've got sound engineers in there that know both, because you
Yeah.
might be good at one but not the other. That's going to be a real challenge then to make sure that the performance and experience is good. I could see it enhancing the experience a lot. I could see that being very, very cool. But I think, like you said, the expense, not just the equipment, even just making sure that the labor part of it is handled by competent people, it might require training and practice before you get to a point of being able to go live with it. Could be very cool. I
Yeah.
actually have been trying to push. I haven't gotten any clients who are open to spending the money, but I'd like to do immersive. It's like outdoor, because I live in Florida. So I feel like when I moved to Florida, all of a sudden outdoor sound became more cool to me, because I used to live in Illinois and I grew up in New York, and in both
Okay.
places you get
Yeah.
like 2 months a year for outdoor sound. So that wasn't a concern. Now I'm
Right.
like, I want to spend all my time outside. It's nice here.
Right.
I think it'd be cool to do immersive backyard systems, like your pool deck or something. Basically, you would intentionally create a hemisphere of sound around the pool deck, by placing speakers in key locations and using sculptural elements to allow you to place overhead speakers, which all of this has been done before. It's just not done in residential. So I'm waiting for the right client to come in and say, I like your idea, Matt, let's do it, make it happen. And I would utilize the same kind of technology, like the Constellation system or something like that to do that. And I think the challenge there, which who knows, maybe AI would become a tool that would help with this, but you've got to essentially then render all of the content that somebody wants to play during their whatever there is their pool party to these speakers. It's not a surround system in the sense of like a home theater. In fact, if you think of it from like the standpoint of like bias towards the front, what's the front of a pool deck?
Yeah,
Like this
really.
is all stuff you'd have to.
It's funny how we, after all this time, we're still oriented to the front, the proscenium
Yeah,
arch. And you
yeah,
touched on it earlier. Maybe it has to do with the evolution of our from our earlier selves, that we needed to be focused out front, but uh, but for whatever reasons, still are we're oriented to the front.
yeah. And it's challenging when you have environments, like I said, like a pool deck where there is no front,
Yeah,
or the front is arbitrary. You have to pick a point, but it isn't necessarily a
right,
logical front.
right.
So speaking of that, the proscenium, you brought in Brian Vessa, who had a talk at our one of our RP meetings, and Brian made a point that I thought was so interesting. Again, I think you can speak to this better than I can, but it was one of those, oh, I didn't know that. So Brian said that the way that the wide speakers are used in an Atmos commercial soundtrack, so the far field mix that you would get in a cinema, is for what he referred to as a proscenium effect, and that basically it was designed to create a separation, if I understand this correctly, between the movie content and things like the music. So typically the music and everything was played more through the wides. And he said that when you go to a near field mix, they actually fold all that in. Even though we have wides as an option, they fold all that into the LCRs instead. And that there is no proscenium effect that's used in the home system. Did I describe that correctly per your recollection?
That sounds that I think that's right. Yes, but I I quibble a little bit with characterizing it as the proscenium effect. It's just, but that's a semantic quibble. But yeah, but there people do things. Some people do things well, and some people do things not so well. There's a lot. There's there's no police enforcing good taste, but what was I going to say? Proscenium, oh, I had a point there. Brian Vessa, it escapes me now. I was going to, maybe it'll come back, but
That's
uh
okay. Happens to
yeah.
me all
oh,
the time.
oh um oh the I get, maybe it was wides. Yeah, there are configurations, and in fact, Dolby encourages it now, is adding wide speakers outside left and right that are not
Hmm.
the ones that are for, and that's kind of an interesting thing. There's a fair amount of that around now.
Yeah, I think we're seeing more of a push. We did it obviously within CEDIA, RP22. Did I say
Yeah.
that right?
Yep.
Yeah. I should know these by heart now, but there's
Yep.
so many committees anymore that we're on. So
Right.
RP22 is the audio best practices, and they had basically pushed for the notion that a level 3 or 4 room needs to have essentially a 9.1.6. They didn't exactly say it that way, but it ended up being 15 speakers or more. So while you could arrange it, I suppose, as an 11.1.4, and it's the same thing, I think the essence of what they were getting at was a 9.1.6 or better. And that means wides,
Yeah.
and so when you get into adding wides, I think the argument against it, which I've given myself, is two things. One, you're taking a set budget, and I got to say, I've worked for billionaires before. Everybody's got a budget. I've never worked on a theater project ever in my life where there was literally zero budget. So the first thing is that you're taking that budget and you're dividing it up over more speakers. And within certain budgets, that actually might be taking away from the quality. So I've argued that it needs to be a consideration against the effect on quality. So if adding wides means that we have to go to a cheaper speaker in order to allow for an extra set or two, um, are you okay with that shift? And in some cases,
Yeah.
it's not a big deal, or it doesn't really affect the price that much. But when you're talking about a couple $100,000, that actually could have a significant effect given how expensive good speakers can be. And so we may, and if we're cheaper than that, I think it's a huge effect. If your budget is like $15,000, going from a 7.1.4 system to a 9.1.6 definitely means you're going down a notch in speakers.
Yeah. I just thought of that other point that was escaping me before, which that
Okay.
came out of what Brian was saying, which is just that what he was describing is such an important thing that is too often neglected, which is to say that you really need to remaster movies for home theaters from the cinema
Mm-hmm.
Atmos because they're different. They're different, different space, different SPLs, loudness.
Yeah.
Uh,
Much smaller
but
rooms.
you need to and then that's what Brian was promoting just by all of that description. So, but it's just so important, and sadly, it's not often given the consideration and respect that it deserves. It needs to happen. The other point I wanted to make here is that in thinking about wides and other configurations, in my practice, and there's no law that stipulates this or even necessarily a recommended practice, I think, but the I still believe that the best results are having the speakers match completely throughout.
Mm-hmm.
Use the same speaker everywhere,
Yep.
and so
Should be
and
hanging
not
towers and ceilings.
not just the same manufacturer or the same series from that manufacturer, but the very
Mm-hmm.
same ones, so that they match in all
Yep.
regards. Timbre in the first place, but also what the I guess we call it the spinorama. To me, I still
Yeah.
I we know what we're talking, but so the spinorama, in other words, the radiation. What's a better way to describe the angular, polar?
Well,
Anyway,
yeah, it shows the way the speaker behaves at different angles, but it's basically collapsing it into a set of specific ones. So instead of having to read into the horizontal and vertical, you've got your listening axis, you've got the early reflections, you've got the power, sound power, things like that. That it's laying out for you to make it easier. I just generally have referred to on the channel as the characterization of the speaker's performance, and
so
then I think the audio.
the important thing is that they should, in my book, is that they should match, not that
Yeah,
any, and so
ideally perfectly.
yeah, and especially with coaxial speakers, and we don't have a lot of choices in that regard these days. There used to be the Tannoy Gold Seals, if you back in the day, and Genelec now has
Mm-hmm.
the Ones series, and but
Yep.
that's even better yet because it's and it's a smooth radiation, and I stress to people that it's important that especially in home theaters, what really makes it sing in the space is the phantom imaging.
Hmm.
I mean, it's not good enough to have sound coming from each of the speakers in different places. That in itself is pretty impressive, but what really makes it sing is the sounds that come from between the speakers, and that's phantom imaging. So, but there's phantom imaging and there's phantom imaging. I mean, it's one thing to create a phantom image at, something at 500 hertz, but it's an entirely different thing to have that consistent out to 5 kilohertz or 10 kilohertz even. So, but we want it. We want and something that George Massenburg taught me years ago is one of the best test signals for different things, and including these kinds of things, is to take out your car keys and jingle them in front of a good condenser microphone. And then
Hmm.
if you look at that on an analyzer, like a real-time analyzer, you'll usually see that there's a rising response that goes right out to 20 kilohertz, which is we don't usually think that exists, but organically in nature, but it does. So
Sure.
that's a good test. What we want is we want to be able to pan from center to left and on around and have it be smooth all the way so that you don't hear it jumping from one to the other, and then you don't want it to get dull when it's in between the speakers, and you want it to be consistent everywhere. And for that you need timbre matching, you need level matching, and you need phase alignment. And what we really, in my goal, I my preference is still to do it physically, which is a bit fiddly because if you want to have within 90 degrees of phase shift at 10 kilohertz, you have to be matching your distance to within like a quarter inch. And that's just hard to do. It's it, it's hard
Yeah.
to it's hard to get a point of measurement in the first place. I mean, where am I supposed to be measuring from? I mean, if you're going to have to, if it has to match within a quarter inch, I need to be, first of all, I need to have a spot that is in the right place, and that takes some measurement, and you have to be detail oriented. But then, and then usually that would be on the floor at that point. But we want to be measuring at 1.2 meters above that, 47 and a quarter inches above that. That's a point in space now, and that's how do you? I mean, so how do you do that? But well, I've developed a system for it, and I imagine other people have as well. But but you want to do it. What I do is I first mark a spot on the floor, then I use well, I take a laser in a mic clip
Hmm.
uh, that's coax. So it's a coaxial mic clip. And then I get it vertical, which with a uh, a level, a torpedo level on two angles. I mean, 90 degrees. You get it this way and this way, so you're really vertical, and get that
Hmm.
straight over that spot, and uh, then I take delicately take the laser out of the mic clip, and then put the measurement mic in that same clip that hasn't moved at that point, and get it, and then measure it to be exactly 1.2 meters above the floor, and then I'm on the spot in a way that's precise in the first place, but also repeatable, because these things need maintenance down as you go, and you want to have a way to get right precisely back in that same spot again, which is a point in space. But so that makes it, but it's important because you do want phase coherence. We'd really like to have everything out to like 10 kilohertz to be within 90 degrees. That's the goal. And of course, as you go down in frequency, it's easier, but as you go up, it's more difficult because the wavelengths are shorter. 20 kilohertz is unachievable. It's we don't have that kind of precision, but it's okay. I mean, having phase coherence to 10 kilohertz is a good experience, but you want phase coherence. You want phantom. It's not just that there is phantom imaging, but it's the quality of the phantom imaging. It's not just that there should be something there, but it should be the same as when it's coming from the other speakers. That's my
Yep, that
little.
makes a lot of sense. And I think you actually touched upon something that, there's a number of correction technologies that do focus on linearizing the phase to create better phase coherence. So Trinnov's got their optimizer, Dirac has their correction system. And I think one of the things they do is they try to take some of the work out of it for your average residential person, basically putting a system together in that, especially in the case like Trinnov, because it uses a 3D mic, it can figure out where the speakers are, how far away they are to fairly high degree of accuracy, and then apply an FIR filter to linearize the phase and make it the same across all the speakers or as close as it can get them. Probably similarly, it's not doing it all the way to 20 kilohertz because, as you said, that's difficult. And there's some microphone inaccuracies at that point anyway. Um, but below that, certainly that's part of the attempt. And I got to be honest with you, I don't know that I've ever tried to turn, for instance, optimizer on and off while doing panning tests to see how if it's better or not. But the rest of what you say is certainly a part of the setup process, and I think can be quite time consuming. I recently stumbled upon this. So my one of my techs, who's really good, he was using a laser leveling device that creates an X shape with the lasers. And it turns out that even though it's typically at 90, it's adjustable. So I was playing with it one day and I realized if you set it to 60, assuming your speakers are 60 degrees apart, and you put it right at the RSP at the right height, you can aim the two lasers at the tweeter and then figure out the exact placement you need to get it to where you would put your microphone then for your measurements doing that. So we were doing that, not just for that, but we were adding tops. So I had 4, I went to 6, and we needed to get these are aimed tops. It's from Perlisten, so they have like an aimed waveguide system, and it's really critical that you get them at least roughly right. And so we were using the fact that you could do this to figure out where the speakers needed to go and be aimed to get everything correct, because it created a laser line down the speaker that we were using. And I realized this is actually a really handy tool for calibration going forward as well.
I use a similar approach, building on that reference point that I just described. When it comes to measuring the angularity, I have a work surface. It's a work table that I can. It's a stand-up work table, so I can get it at the reference height at 1.2 meters, and and then use that work surface for measuring angles. But once again, I need to be precisely located to my reference position, which is on the floor, and I'm putting a table over it. And how do I know? So what I've done is I drilled a hole right in the center of the table, and on the underside, I have a hook that's concentric with that, and I hang a plumb bob from that that
Hmm.
goes down, and I just then position the table until that plumb bob that's by definition, it's vertical, is right on that spot. And I make it a big conspicuous spot where there's a big X, and then right in the middle of the X, there's a precise dot. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a gross location by the big X, and then there's a precise with the, so I get that plumb bob there on it, and then that comes up, and then that spot at the top of the table is once again right at and from there I can use laser angle measurement for horizontal angles, but also for vertical angles and pans, all from that precisely located reference point of measurement. And it
Very
works.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that sounds like a very effective approach. And I think goes to the degree of professionalism and experience that you have, but also what's needed to do this. I think we've had some discussions about that. I feel like one of these days we need to collect all the tricks that people are using right now to do this type of stuff and try to distill it down into some education to make sure that that continues on with future generations of calibrators, and engineers, because there's stuff that people like yourself, Anthony Gramani, and others have through the years figured out works very well, makes you more effective. And then if it stays like IP, basically, if it stays proprietary to you, and then you retire, hopefully, I'm sure you want to retire someday, and I want to retire someday, there needs to be a next generation that can carry that on and actually do that as
That's right.
well. So I'm hoping that as time goes on, we can start to take this stuff, like I said, collect it and distill it into best practices that can be used by others. I know there's something about keeping your secret sauce secret, but there's a part of me that just doesn't care. It just wants people
Yeah.
to learn this stuff and
Yeah.
use it.
Right. Well, and I think that's the intent with the RP32 group. The
Mhm.
uh, we'll see that we'll see how that actually works out in the end, but I think that's the intent, at least.
Yeah,
To
I shared two of my. I don't see it as IP because I didn't invent it. I just figured out how to do it. I guess with like I figured out that how to actually do it, but I shared two of my measurement techniques that were not known by others. One was for noise floor measurement. I think you might probably run those calls where you point two microphones at each other and you do a coherent averaging to lower basically eliminate much of the electronic noise from the microphones and measurement systems so that you're only measuring room noise. And the other one was an impulse response method for measuring sound transfer, so the transmission loss through walls.
Mm.
And somebody had said to me, and I think it was a fair comment, but they said, I appreciate what you're doing, but you should really keep that stuff to yourself. It's what makes you special. And I was like, well, I get it, but I didn't invent that. I read it in a paper and then I applied it.
Yeah. Well, and
But
I think there is some of that around too. People want to jealously protect what they see as their competitive advantage.
yeah. Well, we've been talking for about an hour now, and I want to thank you for your time. I think it was a great conversation. Hopefully, I can have you on again sometime and talk about more
Sure.
things. Like I
Yeah.
said, you've worked in this industry a long time, and you've been a critical part of the development of many of the things that people just take for granted. I mean, when we think about what Atmos is, where speakers go, how they're set up, how the content is mixed, all of that, people don't really think about how that happens. But you've been a critical piece of that over much of its history. And I thought it'd be neat to have you on here. I did not know about the Stevie Wonder part until you mentioned that in the beginning. So, like I said, I just grew up listening to. I've always loved soul music, and so people like from Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder, and I just happened to pick two of the blind ones. But actually, of course, there was many really famous soul singers, Marvin Gaye.
Yeah.
Um, and so I've always Otis Redding actually was one of my favorites for a really long time. I still love Otis Redding,
Yeah.
and so Stevie Wonder still being with us and still producing amazing music. I mean, he's done a bunch of stuff for soundtracks where he's still as great as he ever was. It's very cool to know that you worked with him for a long time and kind of got your start with that. I can't even imagine what it would have been like to sit there engineering some of the stuff he was putting out.
Yeah. Well, he's a fabulous person. Just a fabulous person, not just a fabulous musician. He's just a great guy. Really great guy.
Yeah. Well, he seems that way, at least from the
And
persona
it's
he
real.
projects. But that's great
It's
to hear.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
that's
true.
great to hear. All right. Well, thank you again. I appreciate you coming on the show. And for everybody else, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And keep coming back. We got more content coming and more special guests. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Matt.